In this episode, I'll talk about beautiful moments with horses and how we can know that they're beautiful. I mean, who gets to say? If a horse piaffes in the forest and no one is there to judge it, can it still be beautiful? Let's explore that. So here we go, episode 157, In the Forest. Hi, I'm Karen Rohlf, and welcome to Horse Training in Harmony. This podcast is about you making progress with your horse in a way that you both can love. It's about learning how to move and be in harmony. Because yes, you really can develop a horse to be both athletic and happy. When we show up as our best selves for our horses will show up for us. So, let's get started. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? So if a horse piaffes in the forest and no one is there to judge it, can it still be beautiful? So today, something really beautiful happened with me and Ovation. I want to tell you about it. So Ovation, at the time of this podcast, is like 20 years old. Now he knows all the movements from the Grand Prix. He knows the pieces, he knows the movements, but collection was really difficult for him to learn, and especially at the canter. So as he started to have to collect, I had trouble keeping his rhythm, a nice clean 3 beats. But it's a process, and he got it. And then flying changes were really hard for him to learn, but he got it. And then tempi changes were at that point not too hard until we got to the 1 tempis. But he got it. They were still a challenge though, and the 1 tempis were probably the most difficult thing that I've ever had to teach him. So they were always a challenge. They weren't quote unquote reliable. And by that I mean his canter had to be like just so, and his mind had to be just so, and I felt like I had to be absolutely perfect, and then if all those stars aligned, maybe we would get our 1 tempis on any particular day. And, I made a lot of mistakes along the way with him, and we did get to a point where, he could do them, but there was always a little more tension around that movement than I prefer. And so in the last year, I've thought, he's 20 years old now, and I really, 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 really want to go like all the way back to the basics. And I want to take some time away from the more complicated movements that he found stressful, that he was willing to do. He's so keen and ambitious and willing to do what I asked. But I still felt, this really doesn't seem like fun for him. And I can compare it because there's lots of other stuff that he does that he seems really into and loves to do and loves to offer. So I wanted to go back and really rebuild another layer of relaxation into this and confidence in everything he did, and really wanted to let him trust that his life now really is about showing him the ease with which he can do the things he knows how to do, right? It doesn't have to be about push and physical and raw. I wanted him to be feeling like a Zen master, one of those like the old 70-year-old black belt who doesn't move and people go flying, that he could really, I wanted him to feel like he was the master of these movements. And if I got the balance just right, then he could be in the highest possible degree of lightness and with the most calmness and the most sort of efficiency of power, while still maintaining his keenness and his cooperation. And he's such an ambitious horse now. So, he's happy to put in the effort. But how can I have it, just next layer of harmony? And so, when you decide to do that, It's been many months, many months of just mostly simple walk, trot, and canter, in collection, but, a little bit of lateral work, some piaffe, schooling pirouettes, occasionally just a single flying change. But in everything I did, it wasn't about, oh, I'm going to do pirouettes today, but it was all with the intention of using those movements to create this balance that would bring the ease and the calmness and the lack of pressure. I wanted him to feel like he was the master of what he had learned. So I kind of accepted that maybe by doing that and really honoring what was light and easy for him to do, that there's a possibility that we might not ever do one-tempies ever again. And, it's like, oh, poor Karen. But you know what? When you can do one-tempies, they're pretty darn fun to do. So it takes a lot of self-control to not do some of these super fun things. So it's been, I can't even really remember the last time I did one-tempies and asked for them. So I'm sure it's been a year. And so today, on this very hot, muggy summer morning, we were riding on the top of the hill in the back pasture near a tree line. So summer is really about chasing shade. And he felt so lovely this morning. And, I'll say we felt lovely this morning because I'll take a little credit for not messing it up. But we just were, you guys know that feeling. It's just like, this is just really nice and really beautiful. And we were maintaining our balance, and he was using a lot of self-control with his speed and, experiencing a lot of lightness and just able to kind of move through the fields and even on a slight hill in this morning muggy heat, but in the shade. And just, I'm like, this is why I ride. This just feels so amazing. And so decided to finish the ride with just some big figure eights and do just some single individual flying changes. And just, it was a good day to do them. His balance was so nice. So we did, and we did a couple dreamy ones to each side. I think we did 2 to each side. And then I went straight. And as I straightened out and sort of went across the field, I felt him make a small adjustment to his body and his alignment. And the next thing I knew, he was doing flying changes every stride. 1, 2, 3. I thought, just make myself invisible. 4, 5, follow, but don't push. 6, 7. And for me, that was enough. I was so excited. So I just relaxed and I just started rubbing him. And I was just like, thank you, thank you, thank you. You're so amazing. And I slid off of him. I was actually bareback at the time, took off his bridle, and just plopped myself down in the grass and just kept reaching up, giving him cookie after cookie after cookie. And he gave a big snort and blew his gorgeous boogers all over me. And I couldn't have been happier. So we stayed for a little while, and then we walked the 10-acre field, back to the barn, and he was at liberty and my arm just over his back. And, I've felt horses offer one-tempies before. Sometimes they do it out of nervousness because you've really been working on them. And, or if they're a more seasoned upper level horse, those horses will often offer them, maybe instead of doing the twos, they become almost like a trick. They get good at them. And horses, in order to do one-tempies, they really have to kind of decide and go for it. So some of them find it a fun trick. But for ovation, these were never easy. And they never seemed fun for him. So this, of all things, the thing that I really was never going to ask of him, at least in this recent moment, it was such the most beautiful thing to feel from him, to feel him decide to do it. So I'm just, it's kind of blowing my mind, right? To think of this as a movement that he had to really learn from scratch. I mean, I've taught other horses one-tempies, and this was not simple with him. And, we hadn't been doing it a year. And, I was imagining that he must have been feeling something like, I feel like I could do that weird skipping thing that Karen seems to like. And he made a decision, and he planned it, and he adjusted himself, that little adjustment that he made in his own body, in his alignment. And then he knocked it out. I mean, it's really quite incredible that this stuff works at all anyway. But to have that happen. So, in that moment, nothing else mattered. I mean, I always try to be in the moment with my horse. But that feeling, it's like, wow, like nothing else mattered. And I didn't care if he maybe wasn't uphill enough, or if a judge might have scored them a 6 and not an 8. I didn't care if someone might say he needed to be more collected, or if someone else might say he should have been more forward, or someone else might have said, his head wasn't at the perfect angle. Or maybe if I had looked at a video of it, I would have, am I sitting straight? Am I slumping? I didn't care. I was deep in the forest, the proverbial forest, with my horse, and it was beautiful. So, if a horse piaffes, or does one-tempies, in the forest, and no one is there to judge it, can it still be beautiful? Well, I guess it depends on the definition of beautiful. If a tree falls and no one hears it, does it make a sound? As I read, it depends on the definition of sound. So some people would describe that a sound is only a sound when it meets the human ear, when somebody is there to hear it. And then, of course, other people would say, no, even if there's no human there to hear it, it does make a sound because you can record it. But reading about that statement, that question, there were many people who would say, no, if no one was there to hear it, it didn't make a sound, if no human was there to hear it. And thinking like, what arrogance. If the human doesn't hear it, it isn't true. As if nobody else mattered. There's bugs that can feel it. I don't even know if bugs hear, but they can feel it. Other animals can hear it. It's happening. So might it not be the same with our horses? If no one is around to judge it, can it not be beautiful? Yeah, I think it can be beautiful, even if no one is there to judge it. Once I actually asked this question to someone. She was a owner of top-level, internationally competitive horses. And I said, yeah, kind of like a joke. Well, because she was asking me why I don't compete. And I just sort of made a joke and said, well, if a horse piaffes perfectly in the forest and no one is around to judge it, is it still a perfect piaffe? And she said, no. Didn't even hesitate. As if judges were the only ones who mattered. But do you know who else is there in the forest with you and your horse? You. You are there. You are the witness. Once I had a student back on Long Island, and this was at a time where most of my students were in like full training, which meant, I rode their horses and they rode their horses, but only in lessons with me. And I was always encouraging my students to like, go ride by yourself. And this one woman said, I had the most beautiful ride on my horse, and I wasn't in the arena. I went way out in the field where nobody was around, because if it felt fantastic, no one could be there to tell me otherwise. And, I thought it was a funny joke. And, you could think of, well, that's a recipe for doing things wrong and not making progress. That was just a way of saying, well, that way I can make a mistake and nobody can tell me. So I'll just feel good about myself, even if I'm, doing something horrible. But it's actually quite a profound statement. I want to ride alone so no one can tell me otherwise. Because how many people do you know? Or maybe you are one of these people. I see lots of people who get stuck in their progress from the opposite. They get stuck in their progress because they're feeling like it's never good enough. People who can get a 70%, a high score on a dressage test, but then obsess over one little thing. That actually happened to me. It just reminded me of a story. I had a student who we found her a horse. She was a lower level rider, and we were looking for a sort of second level perfect amateur horse that she could get experience competing on at the lower levels. And then meanwhile, I would train it and kind of keep it moving up the levels. And we found the perfect horse. But then she kind of, I think, chickened out a little bit from competing. But I kept training her. And we competed. We were doing, I think, like a 4th level test, and she got in the 70s. And on one of her trot extensions, she got a 9. I mean, the horse really had beautiful trot extensions. And the judge wrote on the comment, could be more uphill. Now, this is a normal thing to do because the judge has to write why it wouldn't be a 10. If you're going to give a 9, you can't just say beautiful, right? Because then it'd be like, well, then why didn't you give me a 10? So often high scores will have a comment that tells you what's wrong with it. So could, more uphill. And this owner was just, she got the test, this is supposed to be her 2nd level amateur horse. Here I'm a professional competing at 4th level on it, got in the 70s and a 9 on extension. She looked at that one comment and decided to be upset about that. Why are you still getting comments about being not uphill enough? Why is she not uphill enough? Like, hello? So in this case, her horse, quote, piaffes in the woods, did this beautiful extension. Someone did judge it. They judged it to be pretty darn beautiful, 9 out of 10. And still, this person wasn't happy. So I think, students can get stuck not by blissfully riding around unaware of how horrible they are. I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is students are riding around feeling beauty, having opportunities for beauty, and they're missing it because they think they're not good enough, because they're trying to figure out if somebody else outside the woods, outside the forest, to see what they think about it. So can we really base our definition of something beautiful happening between ourselves and our horse on some special person? The tree falling doesn't make a sound unless there's a human there to hear it. We're not having beautiful moments on our horse unless there's a judge there, or a magic trainer, a special guru. I've competed and won classes with good scores, but knowing it was not a beautiful harmony between me and my horse. And I've gotten low scores on very plain horses who had transformed themselves and they were trying their little hearts out. And I knew no matter how hard they tried, they would never score above a certain point or never win over even average horses. So the feeling of beauty was between me and the horse. When the tree falls in the forest, it doesn't care who's outside the forest judging what may or may not have happened inside the forest. It doesn't care if there's some special person inside the forest or not inside the forest. When you ride, the real beauty is there inside the relationship of you and your horse. And everyone can feel beauty and harmony much more easily than they can feel correct. It doesn't have to be a piaffe or one-tempies. It can be a free walk or a trot transition, or your horse coming to you at liberty or standing calmly. If you focus on what someone outside might score what you're doing, it's the same as standing in the forest, seeing a tree fall, hearing the tree fall, and then calling someone in the city to ask them if the tree made a sound. If you're riding your horse and you feel something, instead of thinking, is this right? First, pay attention to what you're actually feeling. Can you enjoy it? What's the energy from the horse? How is the horse feeling about it? And if you do decide to call outside the forest for someone to tell you what it is you're feeling or what you should be feeling, who are you going to call? I mean, different people are going to give you different judgments. One will say, no, never do that. Another will say, oh, you must do that. I mean, we know this. Anyone who's had more than one judge or instructor or who's scrolled through Facebook knows you can get the full range of opinions from one situation. Because you know what? Really, there are no rules. It's all made up. Now, of course, you might have a trusted instructor, but unless they're right there with you in that forest, in that exact moment, you still need to trust your experience. And really, your horse will be looking only for you and your response in that exact moment, not delayed until confirmation from the outside you missed it. You know, that space that you and your horse occupy is a complex, deep, lush place full of a variety of choices and sensations and movements and feelings. It's a place to explore. It's a forest you can get lost in. I mean, I recommend getting lost in it. So can you dive deeply into the space of you and your horse and lose time? Enter the timelessness of the infinite present moment and feel fully, knowing that really everything is beautiful and you are enough. Now, I'm not saying you can't get help from other people. Of course you can. The challenge of learning is to stay fully in the moment and be able to still hear and interpret and try to do what's being asked of you. To be able to hear the whispers from outside the forest without you actually leaving the forest. And that's why I teach the way I do, without so much domination and micromanagement. I want to talk with the students, give them concepts, and then let them play and give feedback and give them the time to drop in with their horses and then check in with me. So, yeah, if a horse piaffes or walks or trots or comes to you at liberty or stands calmly in the forest and there's no one there to judge you, yeah, it's still beautiful.